Hey everybody, it's Tammy. It's been way too long since my last tutorial. Today we're going to be doing an acrylic painting. Here is your paint colors that we'll be using today. I am on a 10 by 20 wood cradle board, and I have gone ahead and primed that with gold gesso. I did use the Daniel Smith gold gesso for acrylic and oil paint. You don't have to use gold, and you don't have to use that particular brand, but this is what I have on hand, and that's what I'll be using today. So I'm just deciding on my colors here, and we will get started. I hope you've been doing well, and hey, if you find this tutorial enjoyable, I would appreciate you leaving a comment, giving me a thumbs up, and consider subscribing. Okay, so I'm going to be using sap green, blue violet, titanium white, dioxazine purple, deep magenta, and turquoise. And I may throw in some other colors later. I'm just dampening and I'm just using a fan brush. It doesn't have to be a fan brush. A flat brush will do just as well. And I'm using my dioxazine purple, followed by my blue violet. And I'm really just kind of making a zigzag curve around the center of my canvas here. I've used my turquoise, and I'm going in with just a little bit of the white. And now I'm going up with my brush and pulling that paint upwards, dampening my brush as I need to. Also, I'm pulling it downwards, dampening my brush again as needed. Dampening your brush really helps the paint to release from the bristles, and it helps to move that paint along. Also, any paint that's on the board as well that wasn't completely dry. My environment is really dry today, and so my paints are drying pretty quickly. If you don't have the colors that I'm using today, then use what colors you have. You do not have to use the colors that I have. I'm just taking a soft brush, and I'm going up and down and sideways with the paint that I have on the board, and just fanning that upwards and downwards and sideways. I'm going to be adding some green gold. And using an angle brush, I'm just going to be adding leaves around my board. I start off and I'm not crazy about the direction or the size of that leaf, so I just use my little wipe and I wipe that down and start again. A great thing to have on hand are little baby wipes. And I'm really just going in and adding leaves. I'm adding background greenery. You want to variate the color combinations that you use for your leaves. You don't want them being all the same color. You want some lighter and some duskier, some brighter, depending on where they're going to fall in your painting. Anything in the background you kind of want that stands up above your horizon line, you really kind of want to be a little bit more faded and towards the background, and anything closer to the foreground, you want there to be more color. And I'm really just trying to follow the curve that I set out with my initial paint that I laid down. Just following that curve around. And you can be very loose and creative. You don't have to do them just like mine. You do you. And then we're just going to dry this really well, making sure that all this paint that I've laid down here is completely dry before we move on and adding our next layer. You want to use your blow dryer on a cool temperature, or your heat gun quite a ways away, and you don't want to keep it over top of that acrylic paint. All right, I'm also adding some luminous rose and luminous yellow deep. And I'm beginning to fashion some petals using the rose and the yellow deep or warm, if you have either one will work, and a little bit of white. Now you need to keep in mind that your acrylic paints are going to dry a little bit darker. So you'll see me go into my roses a few times to add more paint and more depth. Now I'm just using my number 2 round brush, and I'm just dotting in some of that luminous rose and white, I believe, and making it a little bit darker at the bottom and the undersides, a little bit lighter at the top where the sun would naturally hit. And I've gone back into this rose and I realized that I'm picking up some paint that I've already laid down. And so I'm realizing that it's a little bit too wet still, and I'm going to have to come back to it in a little while. I keep trying to fix it, and that's always a mistake. If you find that you're lifting your paint up, you need to leave it alone. And so I'm just going to some of the other petals and working on those. And at this point I have some pretty thick paint down, so it's going to take a little bit for it to dry. And I'm back trying to fix that spot again, and it's fighting a losing battle. All right, I'm back over to the hyacinth. I've given up on the rose for a little bit. And I'm just, again, working with my luminous rose and white. I'm using my round brush and just tapping it in to make some petal type forms on my page. Now these are going to be more towards the background, and so they do not have to be perfect. They're just going to be kind of a blurred flower in the back. On this rose, I tried to use a little bit more yellow, but ultimately I went back more towards the pink, making kind of a peachy color. And ultimately what started off as more of a very, very light yellowy peach color is now pretty much pink. And once again, following that curve, I'm going ahead and adding another full-size rose and a couple of buds. When you're making flowers such as roses, the definition really comes from your shadows and highlights. And so where the deepest part of the rose, the bud will be, is going to be your darkest. And as it comes out towards the light, will be your lightest or brightest color. Okay, and I've decided to make another hyacinth here between these roses. This one I want to be a little bit lighter. And so I've allowed this flower to dry. I learned a little bit from my first one. And I'm going in and adding more of those highlights and that depth in the darker areas. And you're really beginning to see the form of this rose. And I only used just 2 brushes in this entire painting, and that was my number 2 round, and I believe it was probably a 1/4 inch angled brush. You could definitely use a flat brush versus the angled brush. And in fact, it probably would be a little bit easier if you've never done a rose before. I have light coming in my studio window, so please forgive the weird colorations that you're seeing on my substrate there. And so it takes perseverance and layering of the color in order to get the depth that you want to achieve. Okay, I'm adding more highlights to the hyacinth. And just a little bit more dimension there now that that's dried some. Adding more of the shadow towards the bottom. And I'm going in and adding in some additional greenery where it's needed. All right, I'm going to try to pull down some of the pink from the flowers. And if I need to, I'll add just a touch of it to my brush. And of course, go sideways. And I'm really just kind of fashioning the shapes of petals right there as part of the shadow of that center rose, and then pulling some of that pink down. And I'm really just adding some definition, some variance in the shade of green into the leaves. Guys, once again, if you're finding some value in my tutorial, I would really appreciate you considering to subscribe to my channel. I am a multimedia artist. I like to work with acrylics, sometimes watercolor, resin, pastels, and so many mediums I enjoy working with. And so if any of those or all of those appeal to you, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell for all, and you will be notified when my future videos are loaded. Okay, I'm going in with some of my white, and a little bit of the paint on my canvas is still a little bit wet, and so if I pick any of those colors up, I'm pretty okay with that. So I'm just taking my flat brush and just doing some straight lines of white going in just one direction horizontally across my canvas, and I'm picking my canvas up to kind of keep track of where I have them, and sometimes I'm using my fingers to kind of spread it out a little bit, and other times I'm laying it and leaving it. And there you are. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you the next time.